metaphor, almost joke, about Hegelian vision of reality would have been for me what I read in a certain book about modern philosophy, forgot even which one, where this book tries to explain quantum mechanics and evokes computer games. The idea is this one, that you know how to read Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. We all know today that Heisenberg himself got it wrong. Bohr corrected it. It's not only an epistemological obstacle, that you cannot measure this and that. The gap, the opening is in the thing itself. So here is this wonderfully simple idea. You know, if you play, I unfortunately do, being terrorized by my son, these computer military games, you see a forest in the background. But this forest is not even fully programmed. You know what I mean? Because if it's not part of the game that you can go there, then why spend time programming all the details of the trees there? Or you have a house in the background. If you cannot enter the house, of course, the inner of the house is not programmed. Now comes the beautifully simple idea. What if God was the programmer of our world and was in the same sense a lazy programmer? He thought we humanity are too stupid to move beyond the atom. So God says, why should I then even program the position and capacity? The humans are too stupid, no? We were a little bit too bright for God. But now comes the true materialist task. And this is, I think, the true Hegelian challenge of quantum physics. Can we think this incompleteness of reality without God thinking it in a materialist way? This, I think, is the task. If you just permit me now to add some short concluding remarks. Of course, in a way it is true. We cannot simply, it's ridiculous, become Hegelians. We should be the first to admit that there are things that Hegel couldn't have thought. I think that my first thesis, they concern the topic of repetition. Because, you know, as Gilles Deleuze, he didn't know that he was also a Hegelian, as Gilles Deleuze made it clear, what really characterizes the post-Hegelian space, it's not all this bullshit, positivity of being, full life, real, actual life. It's a notion of repetition, mechanic pure repetition, which, in contrast to Hegel, involves no Aufhebung or idealization. Hegel has, as you probably know, a beautiful theory of repetition, which is precisely, back to Julius Caesar, he develops it apropos Caesar. Know how? Caesar is first just a name, Julius Caesar. Then he dies, he repeats himself as a universal title, Caesar as the title. So Hegel's point is idealization. But what about what we find in thinkers as opposite as Kierkegaard and Freud? Wiederholungszwang or Kierkegaard's repetition, a kind of a pure repetition. And my point is that it's not that Hegel simply didn't see it, but there are signs which point towards this unthought of Hegel. And the way we should think further from Hegel is not to say, oh, there is a totally different domain. It is, and there are many points where you can clearly see how paradoxically Hegel wasn't Hegelian enough. Isn't this the whole point of Marx? What is effectively Marx saying, if you read Capital really closely, is basically that Hegel's theory of economy, although Hegel read Adam Smith and so on, didn't yet capture the whole speculative madness of Capital. Hegel in economy was still this naive manufacturist, you know, people collaborate. The idea of this incredible ideal strength of capital as abstraction which rules concrete lives. Like, Hegel wasn't Hegelian enough there. That's basically the thesis of Marx. That if you take Hegel's matrix of subject, substance, The whole passage from money to capital, of course, is passage from subject to substance, and so on and so on. Again, and what maybe makes precisely the example of capital so wonderful is that Marx uses in Grundrisse fragments, I think, a very precise expression that capital is ein automatisches Subjekt, an automatic subject. What does this mean? Capital is a subject beyond schlechte Unendlichkeit, spurious infinity, self-relating, but at the same time automatic. This, though, capital was, I think, would have been such a horror for Hegel, because he would have to think something which at the same time is actual infinity and the bad, endlessly repetitive infinity. So then there are, sorry, don't have time, other wonderful examples. For example, I think it absolutely should be reread Hegel's theory of madness from the first point of the first chapter of the third part of Encyclopédie Philosophie des Geistes, where Hegel develops, like to put it naively, the rise of human spirit out of animal life. And my God, it's more radical than Michel Foucault. The key notions are Wahnsinn, madness, and Gewohnheit, habit. And the idea is that the passage through radical madness, even if, of course, doesn't happen to all of us empirically, it's a permanent background to being human. And I think here we can see this negativity as Wiederholungszwang in Hegel, in his necessity of war, in his theory of madness. I don't have time to develop it, also in his, for example, theory of rebel, Pöbel. And even, I claim, okay, to add a little bit of spice, to end, in Hegel's theory of sexuality. Hegel is there an anti-Hegelian, vulgar evolutionist. He treats sexuality as something basically biological, which we then, through our cultural development, we symbolize it, vermitteln, mediate it, and so on. Like, I no longer jump over a woman, I write poems, whatever you want, mediate. But you know what Hegel doesn't see? And my God, he should have seen it following his own procedure, that it's not as simple as that we don't pass directly from nature to culture. Our cultural rituals in love are not a defense against the brutality of some natural force, but against a certain excess, which we can see in this kind of a radical, deadly, erotic passion, Tristan und Isolde, and so on and so on. That is to say, once we pass from nature to culture, retroactively a third domain of, let's call it naively, radical negativity emerges. And that's the problem. You know who already knew this in a way? Kant even. You know, in his wonderful short writing über Erziehung, he provides his famous definition of man is an animal who needs a master. And then he says why? Not because we must need a master to control our natural instincts, but Kant speaks about some kind of a radical, madly free unruliness, which is typical to man, and which is kind of metaphysical unruliness. So again, to go back to sexuality, what Hegel, if he were to be Hegelian, today would have been definitely against the Catholic Church, and all this bullshit about how if you copulate just for pleasure, you are reduced to an animal, it must be for procreation. Hegel would have said, but isn't it exactly the opposite, that animals do it only basically for procreation? To take something which serves a certain terrestrial biological aim and to autonomize it with regard to that aim, to make it a Selbstzweck, this is the fundamental lesson of metaphysics. So I think Jacques Lacan is right when he claims that the horror of sexuality for Christianity and others is not, they are not fighting their vulgar utilitarian biological life. They are fighting their metaphysical competitor. What worries them in sexuality is that, and this is the thesis of Freud. The thesis of Freud is not we are determined by biology. The thesis of Freud is that sexuality is the very domain where, at its most elementary, the passage from natural to human emerges. Through drive, Wiederholungszwang, which have nothing to do with instinct and so on. So again, let me stop and finish. With half a minute. First, again, I'm not saying let's be Hegelians. I'm just saying in today's crazy world, with all its crazy reversals and so on, it's as if it offers itself to a Hegelian approach. And because Hegel lived in a certain in-between, and we obviously also do, we all know a certain epoch is coming to an end. In this sense, we should repeat Hegel, but repeat Hegel in a Kierkegaardian sense, not in the sense of some Hegelian Aufhebung, but also not in the sense of doing the same as Hegel, but let me put it in this way, as Kierkegaard would have put it, mobilizing Hegelian potentials in today's world. And here, to avoid a misunderstanding, for example, apropos Pöbel or Capital, I think the time has come maybe to even return to Hegel up to a point against great post-Hegelians like Marx. For example, Hegel's passages on Pöbel, rebel, are usually read for, Hegel vaguely saw that part of society is necessarily proletarized, but he didn't see it clearly like Marx. No, isn't it that today, precisely, if there is something going on, is that the main form of class struggle is no longer simply working class bourgeoisie, but that those vaguely, let's say, exploited, are dispersed into many forms of Pöbel, undeveloped, those living in apartheid in apartheids, illegal immigrants, and so on and so on. So maybe we should even return here a little bit from Marx to Hegel. Another point where we should return. Now I will say something horrible. We know that Marx, which you still, I think, find in Humboldt University, philosophers have only interpreted the world as get The point is to change it. My God, I will say something horrible. Today, isn't it that we are living in a time where we can say this? Maybe in the 20th century, we tried too quick, too fast to change the world. And as get the room that we interpret it, reflect a little bit more radically. And this seems to be more and more the most subversive thing to do today. A proof you in Germany are happy here. A brutal fascist counter-revolution called Bologna High Education Reform. You know what's the goal of that one? You know the horrible consequences in England and so on. It's very clear. They want to change us into experts. It is all masked into this, higher education must serve must be socially useful and so on. What they want is that, for example, you have a problem, let's say demonstrations in the suburb of Paris. You call psychologists, how to contain them, you call social workers, you call experts. But sorry, this is not thinking. Thinking is not just solving problems posed to you by others. Thinking is critically questioning the way we perceive problems. Take ecology. Ecology is not just to contain Fukushima and all that. Ecology should also ask, how did it come to that? In what way do we perceive the problem? Like, is it right to perceive it only as a technological problem? Or is it correct to just to spiritualize it in a superficial way, like it's, I don't know, all these anti-enlightenment twists of technology and so on, of ecology and so on and so on. All this is crucial for me. I think that, my God, we are approaching a time where thinking is absolutely needed, like ecology, or think about biogenetics. What is happening if really it will go on what it appears that the limit that separates inside from outside, our experience, sorry, I got your gentle body language, yes, I will finish it. Inside from outside, you know, when you can, for example, already up to a point, control mind from the outside or the other way around, I saw it in England myself. You have already chairs moving for cripples, where crippled people, where you don't even need that Stephen Hawking's finger, you know. You can directly move it by your thought. This changes the very definition of being human and so on. I claim that thinking is needed much than ever. And now I'll give you a theoreticist advice. So be careful to resist the pseudo-temptation of the state of emergency. When I was young, the state of emergency talk was still the talk of leftists, like, oh, you are there living in your ivory tower, but children are starving in Africa. Did you notice that now Bill Gates talks like that? Why? Because if you read all those statements of emergency, which go something like this, why are we still caught in this stupid ideological debate, capitalism, socialism, while children are starving in Africa? Let's get all together, private business, state, NGOs, and let's do something. The message is precisely do in the sense of don't think about it. And even consumption is going in this direction, where I become a Hegelian moment, with which I will conclude. When I'm not for terrorism, not in any way, but I almost become tempted by it when I pass a Starbucks coffee. Because you know what operation you have there. Go into it, at least it's in England and United States, probably it's here. They do a wonderful job of ideology. They have all these posters which basically tell you this. Yes, our coffee is more expensive, but 1% goes for starving Guatemala children, 1% to protect forests. Basically, they tell you this. In the old times, we were split into consumerists and good citizens caring about. Now, we propose you to include the price of solidarity into the price of the commodity, so that you can be totally consumerist, saying, but by buying that coffee, I already covered also that solidarity aspect. The message is, again, don't think buy our coffee, which is a little bit more expensive. Your thinking is included, it will be done by others, and so on.